In the summer of 2021, I prepared for my final gymnastics competition and retirement. I had three main goals. The first was to embrace the experience, both the good and the bad. The second was to win the British high bar title. And the third was to successfully compete on all 6 apparatus. I came within 2 weeks of achieving all 3 of these goals before my body finally caught up with me. I think every retired athlete dreams of making a comeback. In fact, I think it's part of the process, a bit like relapsing if you're on a recovery. And this is my story. So last week on Netflix, the Conor McGregor documentary, McGregor Forever, was released. I started watching it at about 8 o'clock, and by 11:15 at night, that was it. I was making a comeback and I couldn't sleep. And it's interesting, a few years ago when I did retire, I had this big goal of competing on all 6 apparatus. And incredibly, I came within 2 weeks of achieving that before finally my body broke down, my shoulder and my ankle started to struggle, and in the end, I made the correct decision and just competed on the pommel horse and the high bar at the British Championships. And I achieved 2 of those goals. I thoroughly enjoyed the process. I really embraced it, both the good and the bad. And I won the gold medal on the high bar. But, competing on those 6 apparatus always felt like the one that got away a little bit. And when I was a kid, when you start out in gymnastics, everybody wants to be an all-rounder. It's the holy grail of gymnastics, being the all-around Olympic champion or all-around champion. And for me, in the end, it really just became about a bit of a journey of self-discovery. So I did sit back, I laid there in bed, tossing and turning, not being able to sleep, and really pondering that question, like, if I was going to make a comeback, how would I do it? So this is going to be this episode, and I guess the place that I would start would be, where am I right now? And I've been retired now for 20 months, so I've not been doing gymnastics properly or professionally with aims of competing in a competition for, nearly 2 years, which is scary to look back and think how quickly that time's passed. And I guess for the first half of that, I was still going to the gym, so I would go to the gym initially maybe once a week, twice a week. I do an hour and a half, so I'd maybe doing upwards of 1, 2, 3 hours maximum in the gym. And I'd started doing other stuff like going to the fitness gym a bit more, lifting some weights, playing a bit of football, playing 7-a-side. But that first year, I was still in the gym. I was visiting schools, and when I do my school assemblies, I'm still doing handstands and a standing back somersault. So I'm still getting a little bit of a gymnastics fix, and I'm getting myself upside down all of the time. It wasn't until that second half of that period, where we went traveling, and I spent the time with Sam in the gym, documenting the Lucan journey, that literally the day after I caught that skill, that was it. All my motivation to go to the gym was just gone. And then we went traveling. I was doing some training like in the bedrooms that we were staying in the hotel rooms, just to keep fit and keep in shape and also look after my mental health. But when we got back in January, again, I just had no motivation to go and do any gymnastics. It was literally when I watched that documentary last week, and it's a proper rags to riches type story, Conor McGregor's, I felt super inspired, and it's the only time I've had a bit of an itch to get back into the gym. So I started to think about, how would I do that? What would it look like? And I think, being really honest with where I'm at right now is the place to start. So I'm 30. I've not trained properly for 20 months. So if I was going to start, it would be tough. But I think, physically, I'm certainly stronger than I was back then. I've been going to the gym and lifting weights, and, back then when I was training, towards the end of my career, when I'd go to the gym and I'd, lift weights or do conditioning, I was massively hindered because I had this problem with my right shoulder, which still is there. So even doing conditioning in the gym was pretty difficult for me, lifting my own body weight. But now I've been in the fitness gym, building muscle. I'm not far off a stone of muscle I've put on in the first 5 months of this year. So I'm feeling strong. I'm lifting heavier weights than I've ever lifted before. And I think the other thing is probably my fitness. I'm playing football and I'm playing 5-a-side and 7-a-side. And when I started doing that after I'd retired, it was literally like hell on earth. My lungs were burning. They were on fire. I couldn't, 2 minutes in, 5 minutes in, I was thinking, how the hell am I going to play this for 70 minutes, 60, 70 minutes? Whereas now, I enjoy it. I enjoy that feeling. And I think that would massively help me getting back to the gym in terms of getting my routine fitness up. I think it'd be a quicker transition. I think ultimately, though, when I go back to the gym, if I was to make a comeback, I'd have to park the gym and the football to an extent to one side. So, it'd be interesting to see how what I've done after gymnastics and those physical gains I've had in terms of strength and fitness and stamina, how they would help and probably be an advantage when I got back to the gym. I think the disadvantages would certainly be that I've just not put any pressure on my joints for a long period of time. You know, there's nothing quite like gymnastics. There's nothing quite like running full speed down a runway, hitting a springboard, and all that pressure going through your spine and your back and your legs, or on the floor or on the rings, you know, literally putting your shoulder joint through so much stress swinging around the rings. There's nothing quite like that. And I think your nervous system as well, this is one thing that people don't talk about enough, but, you know, when you're literally rebounding again and again and again and jumping on the equipment, you're putting your nervous system under a lot of pressure and through a lot of stress. That's one thing that I've not been used to for like 20 months, so it'll be really interesting to see how I would adapt to that. I guess the last thing would probably be my hands. Like, I've lost all of the years worth of hard skin I built up in my working hands is all gone, and now they're really soft. So I'd have to be certainly very careful about how quickly I got back on the high bar, the parallel bars. I was lucky when I was a gymnast. I never really had too many issues with my hands. I know some people really struggle. Sergey, for instance, his hands were so bad that when he was a gymnast, he actually used to wear handguards on the P-bars because his hands would just split and break all of the time. Luckily for me, I never really had too many issues with my hands. They were always pretty. If I had a blister and they ripped, they would recover really quickly. So for me, that was never too much of an issue. So I don't think that'd take me too long. I just have to use a lot of my experience to make sure that I didn't overdo it too fast. But yeah, so I think, and the last point is probably mentally, I'm in a really good place right now. So I've learned a lot more about myself in those 20 months since I retired. You know, I've really tried to just improve, work on the tools that manage my mental health. I know the things in my life to put in place to make sure I'm in a good place. But actually sitting here and thinking about coming back and actually, you know, essentially training as a gymnast, that does fill me with a little bit of anxiety because I know the stress and the pressures that come with that. So yeah, I think that's probably where I'm at right now. And I guess the biggest thing to talk about would be, why would I do it? You know, I'd have to have a big reason why, because it's a massive commitment, you know. When I was training for 22, 23 years of my life, it was a huge sacrifice, and the gymnastics always kind of came first. So if I was going to walk back into those shoes and that way of life, I'd have to have a big reason why. And I think for me, the only reason I would do it would be literally purely self-discovery. It would be about seeing whether I could do it or not. And towards the end of my career, that's what it all came. It came to that. You know, it was really cool. There was one thing that I achieved in the last 2 years of my career that no one probably knows about. It's just a personal achievement. I think I put a picture of it on Instagram, but I had made a bet with one of the young lads in the gym called Liam. That in 2018, I think it was, I said to Liam, one day I'm going to do my 10-skill high bar routine before I retire. I'm going to do it. And when I do it, we're going to have a bet. At the time, I'd just found peanut butter. I'd never ate it before, and I liked the crunchy peanut butter. And so I bet him for a jar of peanut butter that if I ever do this routine again, Liam, you've got to give me a jar of peanut butter. And like, I'm pretty sure Liam believed that I could do it, but he wanted to join in on my little game that I was playing. And yeah, it was amazing. I've got it on video, so I might put it on Instagram after this podcast comes out. But I did the 10-skill routine, and when I landed it, I couldn't believe it. I was so happy. Gave Sergey a massive hug. I've got a picture with the peanut butter. And that was actually, I think that was 4 years, that was. And I never lost sight of that. It was always in the back of my mind. You know, and at that point, it was about myself. It was just a goal that I had with myself. So yeah, I think if I was going to do it, it would have to be that. It would be an experiment. Like, can I do this? You know, it'd come from a place of curiosity. Like, is this possible? How could I put all the learnings and the teachings and the experiences I've had in my career into place to see if I could still do this? So it would be about that. It'd have to be fun. I'd have to enjoy it, you know, and that doesn't mean that I'd be happy 24/7, but I think the majority of the time I was spending in the gym, I would have to be enjoying that process. I'd have to have a smile on my face. I think there's ways in which I could make that happen. I think for certain I'd have to be surrounded by a team. I'd want to be in a team environment. There were so many times when I was younger where I would purposely isolate myself and train at different times to other people. I'd be the polar opposite to that. I'd want to be in the gym when there was the most amount of people in the gym, you know, people to bring me up when the times were tough, people to be around, bounce ideas off, that positive energy. I'd want to be around a team environment. So that'd be really, really important for me. And yeah, making sure I was having fun, enjoying the process. And that doesn't mean, like I said before, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be happy all of the time, but it means that if anyone was to come into the gym, even on a difficult day, maybe where I was struggling, because there'd be plenty of them, I'm sure, and if they were to ask me, like, are you enjoying this? The answer would have to be, yeah, I love it, man. This is brilliant. Because that's how I'd answer, like, my life right now. You know, I'm now trying to build the podcast, my little coaching business, going into schools, writing my book. And at times it's hard. There's a lot of stress, right? But if you were to ask me, like, do you enjoy this? I say, yeah, it's brilliant, man. I wouldn't change it for the world. I'm loving it. So it would have to be that, I think. It'd have to be fun, have to be in that team environment. And, you know, I'd have to put my life first. I think it would have to be life first, gymnastics second. And it was always the other way around. You know, for the majority of my career, it was gymnastics first, life second. And I wouldn't be able to sacrifice, you know, family time, friends. I'd have to make sure that, you know, I was still making a lot of time for that, and that was coming first. So and it's hard when you're training. You know, it's easy now for me to look back and go, oh, that's a great idea, because you just remember the rosy bits. Like, I just remember the gold medal on the high bar and being surrounded by all my friends and that amazing feeling. But, you know, there were plenty of times in that 6 months build up where I was thinking, what on earth am I doing? This is ridiculous. And at that time I was still on the building site. You know, I was waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning, getting to the building site, you know, digging foundations. Sometimes we get there in December or January, it's freezing cold, it might be snowing. The foundations are filled up with water over the weekend. There's 2 foot of water in there. I'm standing in there in my boots or my wellies, digging, like, God, this is tough. And knowing that I've got to go to the gym later and train for 3, 4, 5 hours and do routines. So yeah, I'd have to be very aware that it was going to be really difficult. But the reason why would have to be just a journey of self-discovery to see if I could do it. And like, I think when I think about that and I say that out loud, that does get me excited. I'm like, oh, imagine, could I do that? And it would be for that. I think I'd have to accept as well that, like, maybe it wouldn't work out and I'd be okay with that. It'd be about the attempt rather than getting to the goal in the end. And that was really the case for me, I think, when I got within those 2 weeks of the British Championships, and I had to call it quits. And I'd put in, literally, you know, looking back now, the British Championships in 2019, I think they were April or March 2019, was the last time I competed on 6 apparatus prior to that. So it would have been a 2.5 year comeback. So to get within 2 weeks and be this close and go through all the lockdowns and the injuries, that was pretty tough to take. So I'd have to be able to make sure that I'd be okay with, if it didn't go to plan and I got within a few weeks or a month, I'd be all right with that. And it was, I think that really comes down to you enjoying the process. So yeah, that would have to be, I guess, why I was doing it. And I think the next thing would be, like, what would my life look like? What would that actually look like? What would my week look like? And I think I would train probably 5 days a week. Now, towards the end of my career, when I was building up for that competition, the British Championships, and I was training on all 6 apparatus, you know, I was trying to be really, really clever, very strategic with how I was training. At the time, I was training 5 days a week, so I'd backed off from training on the weekend. I was just having the whole of the weekend off, which made a big difference. It meant that I was a lot more recovered by the time I got to Monday. And my Monday was, at that time, it was about essentially that base of the pyramid. So it was doing basics, it was doing conditioning work, it was physically preparing myself for the rest of the week. And I would still do that. So if I was going to start again, my Monday would be all about basics, technique, conditioning, strength, those fundamentals that were going to set me up and prepare me for the rest of the week. I think a Tuesday would be routines. So on a Tuesday, I'd go in and do one of my big routine sessions, or half routines or skills, depending on where I was at in that build-up. But Tuesday would be a big routine day. Wednesday, I think I'd just go to the fitness gym. So I'd probably just go and do recovery. So I might do, like, shoulder stability work. I might do ankle stability work. I mean, those two areas in particular, my ankle and my shoulder, would be the biggest risks for me, I think, physically. So I'd make sure I'd spend the time in the fitness gym in David Lloyd, putting in the work, and really focusing on that, and also taking a bit of a rest in the middle of the week. I'd lift weights, but I'd jump back to it being very specific for gymnastics. You know, one thing I started to do towards the end was I used to do a lot of like hamstring work. That was really important for like landings. That really helped with landings. So I'd switch back to that because I don't do so much of that anymore. And yeah, it would be really tailored towards my gymnastics. I'd go back to high weight, low rep because I'd probably have to trim down a little bit. You know, I'm trying to get to 70 kilos and trying to do the pommel horse, I think would be pretty difficult. So yeah, I would go back to high weight, low rep again. And I would probably use a spar and recover and do all of that. And then a Thursday would be another probably a technical day. So it might be half routines or skills. And then Friday would be a big routine day. So that would be my main session of the week, that Friday, because it would be the closest to the weekend. And normally you compete on a weekend. And I'd try to replicate as much as I could a competition week within just my training. So that's probably what my week would look like in terms of training structure. I think I would probably do sports massage. So seeing someone like Sam's brother Joe, who I saw at the end of my career, but I'd probably only do that a couple of times a month. I'd still go to the sauna, the plunge pool. I'd certainly take on some of the things that I've learned, you know, just from training in the gym with Josh this year. I'd eat a lot more protein, I think. I'd make sure that I was applying those things. I'd look after my physical health, make sure I was eating enough. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how I coped with, you know, my training going up to maybe 3 or 4 hours of training a day and how that feels. You know, I've got used to doing maybe 4 hours of training a week. So yeah, switching that up, doing five days a week, I'd imagine that I'd probably be probably between 18 and 20 hours a week of training. So that would be interesting. That'd be a big adjustment, I think. But yeah, so my week would probably look like that. I'd probably do the sauna, plunge pool, those kind of things. But mainly, I try to keep my life pretty normal. I wouldn't be making the huge, massive sacrifices with recovery and stuff that I used to. I wouldn't want it to affect my life outside of the gym. I think the happier I am outside of the gym, the happier I would be in the gym. You know, they often say that a happy fighter is a dangerous fighter. I really believe in that. So I'd try to keep my life pretty normal. I think I would still play football, you know. That would be really interesting, you know, when I did gymnastics for the last 15 years, you know, I was almost contracted in my contract with British Gymnastics not to do any winter sports, or I wasn't allowed to essentially get injured doing any other activities outside of the gym. So I'd really enjoy, I think, playing football alongside my gymnastics. And I think they'd both help each other. You know, trying a new thing's been really good for me. It's helped me look at things and approach things slightly differently. So I would definitely do that. I think that's what my life would probably look like in a week. And then I guess the most important bit would be the strategy. How would I approach that? And I think timing is super important. So if I was going to do it and I was going to make a comeback and it was on my terms, I'd probably say I need 12 months. You know, I think 6 months is just not enough time. 9 months, I could probably do it at a push, but I'd be rushing. I think 12 months is how much time I would need. You know, starting from scratch. And it's not scratch because I'm still fit. I'm in shape. You know, I go to the gym. I still do handstands and stuff every couple of weeks, even if it's just in a school. So it isn't starting from scratch. And the amazing advantage I've got is that, you know, I had that experience of doing 22 weeks in lockdown. So I've been here before. I'd know what I'd struggle with coming back. I'd almost know some of the shortcuts and the hacks to kind of cheat the system a little bit. And as you get older as an athlete, you have to do that. You have to learn, right, okay, I can't do the numbers I used to. How can I, you know, almost circumnavigate the repetitions that I would usually have to do back in the day that my body just can't cope with now. So I would apply lots of those little strategies to my training. But it would have to be a year. It'd have to be 12 months, I think. And I'd probably split it up into 3 phases. So I'd have the physical phase, and I call this the pyramid. And this would be the base of the pyramid. This is the foundations. This is my strength work, my conditioning. This is endurance, the basics in the gym, loading my joints, being able to handle 4 hours of training a day again, being able to keep my attention span for 4 or 5 hours. That's one thing I don't think, we probably talk about enough in gymnastics, or we really champion, is the attention span, being able to be on it for 6 hours and maybe do your most important routine at the end of those 6 hours, that's huge. That really is like a massive, massive part of the sport. There's times where I would go and I would do my warm-up before a competition. It'd be an hour and a half. I'd start the competition. The competition could be upwards to 4 hours long sometimes. And at the end would be the moment I'd have to switch on and turn it on. So I've got to be able to keep my attention span for 6 hours. So that's something I'd have to build up again, So that would be the strategy, I think, splitting it into those 3 phases. So the physical part at the bottom, then the technical part in the middle, that's like the skills. So working on the skills and the elements I would put into my routine, starting to think about the construction of the routine. The rules and stuff have changed now, so I'd have to think about that. And then that final piece of the pyramid, I think, is the mental part, which is the routines and the competing. But, if I've done my job, right, and I've done enough physical prep and built strong enough foundations down here, and I've done the right technical work, all I should need to do is put that into practice when I'm starting to do my routines. And don't get me wrong, in the end, it still is physical work. I've still got to do the technical work, but it really becomes a mental game once you get to the routine part. So that's how I'd split it up into the pyramid. And I guess, if I was going to look at what I'd need to do physically, like I said, I'd go to the gym and I would switch to high weight, low rep. I would make sure I do a lot of conditioning and a lot of like loading work, a lot of prep work. I'd have to do a lot of maintenance work, particularly on my shoulder and my ankle, because they're going to be the areas in which are the most risky. That if I'm going to get injured or I'm going to start to struggle, it's going to be those 2 places. And that's where it came at the end when I got within those 2 weeks. It was my ankle. I rolled my ankle a little bit, and then my shoulder was really starting to struggle on the rings. So I'd have to be very aware of those 2 places. I'd have to try and avoid, taking as much risk as possible in those 2 areas. And that would be determined by like how I'd split the apparatus up and what routines I'd look at, how much time I'd put on certain apparatus and certain skills. And then in the skills-wise, I would probably focus on my strengths. So this time I'd really, really focus on my strengths. And that's going to be like the technical stuff. But it's also going to be the skills that in my career were the most natural for me to perform and to train, and are going to require the least amount of, I guess, that skill acquisition period where I've got to learn them again. I would lean much more on my technical ability rather than my physical ability. I think as you get older as an athlete, you certainly lose that power. I know that I did, and particularly after my ankle injury at 21, as much as I needed to believe at the time I could always get back to where I was, I think I just lost a little bit of power, that fraction of power, and that I do believe that diminishes over time. And so for me, it would be relying more on my technique rather than my strength, my power. And those apparatus that rely on my technique more are going to be like the pommel horse, parallel bars, and the high bar. The ones that where I would rely on my strength and that youth, I think, are more floor, vault, rings. They require a bit more brute force, less technical thinking and a bit more physicality. So I would really focus on the technical apparatus. And I think that mental game at the end, I would really use like the strategy. I'd look to build a good team around me. I'd talk with, if I was going to do it, how would I build a team? I'd probably, Sergey's obviously moved over to Ireland now. So I'd probably talk to Josh, and I'd probably have Josh as like my hands-on coach. If he said yes, he'd be there in the gym. I think Josh would really enjoy the process of thinking about, right, what would the preparation look like? I'd probably take on the task of building my routines, designing my routines, because I enjoy that. But I'd give Josh like the preparation, right, Josh, this is how long I've got. This is what I want to do. These are routines I want to do. How long do you think I need? How can we break that down into a week? This is the amount of time I want to spend in the gym each week. And I'd probably pass that responsibility on to someone like Josh. I'd probably have someone like Joe, like Sam's brother, helping me with like sports massage and recovery. I would probably like draft in some of my old teammates to give me a bit of advice. Maybe look to find somebody that's made a comeback before, and maybe talk to them about, right, what did you struggle with? What were the misconceptions you had going into that process, what you wish you had known before you started. Talk to them about that. And then I'd probably still have Sergey on the phone once a week. I'd probably FaceTime him while he's in Ireland. Sergey, what do you think about this? What do you think I should do here? Sergey, I'm struggling with this. Can you give me any advice? So yeah, I'd probably build a nice little team, and I'd have to have some good teammates around me. It would have to be a team thing. It couldn't be just for me, I don't think. That would seem... ultimately being an athlete is quite a selfish way of life. Everything's about you, and I wouldn't want it to be like that. I'd want it to be almost like a F1 pit stop team, that we're all together, where it's me going out there performing, but I can't do that without everybody around me. So that would be really, really important. And yeah, that strategy would be that, I think. And making sure as well that I factor in some holiday time. That's one thing I never used to do, but I think something that makes a real big difference. So what I would probably do is if it was a 12 months, I'd probably have 3 holidays within that time. I'd probably look at doing like 3 or 4 months, 2 weeks off, 3 or 4 months, 2 weeks off. And what I would do actually is probably mock a build-up before the actual competition. So let's say the competition was in 12 months. I'd probably look to do a competition at like the 6-month mark. And it would just be an in-house competition with myself. But I would do a build-up so I could then almost take all that data and information on what I struggled with and how difficult it was and what areas I could maybe tweak for the next time round. Because one thing about gymnastics that is really difficult is to replicate a competition. That's really, really hard. And so just working 12 months to do one competition, it's pretty stressful. So I think putting in some like mock competitions would be really, really important. And that's what I started to do towards the end. And I think talking about like what I said, like almost trying to circumnavigate the process and finding the shortcuts and the cheat codes is really important. And that's one thing I did really well towards the end of my career. And I started doing that when I was younger, actually. I'd figured out that, for example, like most gymnasts will train over a foam pit on the high bar. Just because like everybody really has a high bar over the pit and you want to learn new release and catch skills. So it's much safer when you're doing it on a foam pit. But for me, I like figured out pretty quickly, like when I need to get back onto the high bar over the hard, that's quite a stressful process. And that normally takes a bit of time. That might take 1 week or 2 weeks to get used to doing a new routine and a new release and catch skill on hard. So at the age of about 20, I decided, well, if I just train on hard all of the time and learn my new skills on the hard, it's going to reduce that transition period in a build-up. It's going to make it more efficient and it's going to be a lot quicker and it's one less thing to worry about. So little things like that, I think. For me, towards the end of my career, a big one was floor, My ankle really struggled going from a tumble track that was really soft. It almost gave me a false sense of security when I went to the floor. So I could train on a tumble track and my ankle would feel great because it had a lot more give in it. It was a lot softer and I wasn't restricted with the ankle range that I had after my surgery because, the floor would essentially go down a bit more and it gave me a lot more give in my ankle. Whereas when I got to the floor, it was a quicker response from the floor. It's a bit harder. So it'd be a faster, the floor would give me a faster, reaction. So that I really struggled with my ankle on that. So what I decided to do was I just won't train on the tumble track. If I'm doing floor, I'll just train on the floor. And that really helped me. It got rid of that transition time again, because that's a really hard thing. A lot of gymnasts will train on the tumble track, and it's easy to do routines on the tumble track. It's got so much give in it. Sometimes you'll land in the pit, you can just half run back, and you're having a rest while you're running back. So I kind of figured out, right, I'm just going to go straight to the floor, and that will just give me a little bit of an advantage. And the other thing that is really important is that at the end, if I'm just doing 5 days of training a week, and I'm only doing routines twice a week, that's a big difference. When I was 21, 22, 23, I'd do 4 days of routines a week. So now I'm only doing 2 a week. So what I would look to do is really stretch out that preparation process. So whereas when I was younger, Sergey might say, look, Sam, we need to do 6 weeks of routines for this competition. Well, now I need to stretch that out. And I think I would probably, I'd look to do like a 12-week build-up. So probably 3 months before that competition is when I'd start preparing. And that might be half routines, when I'd split routines into halves. And half routines are really important, I think. A lot of people tend to not do so many halves anymore. They focus on just going straight to routines or just doing skills in the summer. And then they spend like 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks trying to get fit just to get through a routine. And I'd figured out that if I was able to do 2 of each half routine for 2 or 3 weeks before I even started routines, the chances were when I put my hand up in the gym to do my first routine in the preparation, it would really like set the tone because I'd be physically fit enough to get through the routine. And if you get through your first routine in a preparation for a competition, that gives you loads of self-confidence. So I'd definitely stretch it out a bit more and just spend a bit longer on each part of the preparation phase. So a bit more time on the skills, a bit more time on the half routines, and in the routines I'd split it up because you always lose a week or 2. Whenever you're preparing for a competition, there's always something that comes along, a little speed bump, whether it's like a small little niggling injury, whether you get a blister in your hand, you're always going to lose a bit of time. It's very rare that you ever get a perfect preparation. So I used to try towards the end to plan that in. Okay, what if I have a week or 2 weeks where I have a little injury and I lose some training? Let's see if I can bank that training by stretching it out a little bit. So I think that's the strategy that I would probably approach it with. And I guess what I learned from that time when I came within 2 weeks of achieving that goal of competing on 6 apparatus, the things that I really, really learned was, that stretching it out, that time thing, that was massive. I think what I did was, one of the mistakes I made was that I really my difficulty was too high across the board. And that's why I probably got injured in the end, The difficulty was just a little bit too high. What I should have done was split the apparatus probably into parts. So high bar and parallel bars, for me, technically and physically, are the easiest to do high difficulty on. And it's important that my difficulty will be high enough, right? Because that's going to keep me motivated. I wouldn't want to go out there and do just easy routines that doesn't excite me. And I think high bar and P bar are the areas where I could still do some exciting gymnastics. I don't think the difficulty would be as high as it was in 2021. I'd have to reduce that a little bit and I'd really play to my strengths. I'd certainly leave out some of the more physical elements on the high bar and the parallel bars, but those 2 events would be my big hitters. So high bar and P bar, I'd focus on those. They would be my strengths. The middle of the road apparatus will probably be floor and pommel horse. These are probably going to be the risky ones because they're probably the apparatus where when I'm training and I'm doing skills, I'd probably get that false sense of security where, I'm doing really well. I think I could push the difficulty. But when you're doing 6 apparatus, it really is a mammoth task. And I think I'd have to be really strict on myself and make sure I just stuck to the plan. And I think on pommels, I'd probably really focus on my execution. When I did a really nice circle shape, and I felt relaxed, I did great work on pommel horse. And I think I'd really focus on that. I'd probably, leave the skills that were risky. I'd go for consistency on pommel horse, which I never really did that. I was always trying to push the difficulty all the time on pommel, so I'd really focus on consistency a little bit more, and then on floor I'd be really clever, super smart. I don't think I'd take any risks at all. If I was going to have to do 12 months, floor's massive. Floor's a big risk area because if I'm doing 5 tumbles in my routine, that's 5 opportunities for me to hurt my ankles or for something to go a little bit wrong. So I would make sure that all of my tumbles were just as risk-free as physically possible. There would be not a lot of twisting, there'd be more somersaults, and I think it would be making sure that every landing was landing forwards. I'd have to be clever. I'd do double somersaults or finish on a 2.5, that kind of stuff. Just be really smart with that. And then rings and vault would literally be just ticking them over and doing really basic, very technically nice and beautiful gymnastics, but taking minimum risk. And I wouldn't spend a lot of time on those 2 apparatus because they would be the biggest obstacles for me to climb would be rings and vault. I mean, vault is just difficult and dangerous. Like landing on vault is really hard. The landing mats themselves are really, really hard, and that was always the hardest thing for my ankle. So I'd have to be really clever about what vault I was going to do. I'd probably do a Kazamatsu double twist, and on purpose, I would always probably over-rotate, take a big step backwards, so I just wasn't risking landing short. And I think on rings, I'd have to really take my time. rings would be the one apparatus I would just not be sure whether or not I'd be able to pull it off. I think doing any skills where I'm going forwards would just be a no-go. So I have to be really clever with the construction, probably talk with Josh or Sergey, come up with a really smart routine where I'm doing not very many elements, not a lot of skills, but I was still getting a good score, and it was a very clean routine, it was a very safe routine. And I think the other thing that I learned, and is going to be really important for this, is because, you know, I'm 30 now. I can't do the gymnastics I was able to do at 21, 23, 25, even 27, you know? And I'd have to be able to park my ego and the emotion to one side. I'd have to go in and almost treat this as a completely new journey and a new approach and almost a new gymnast. You know, I wouldn't be able to go in and get too excited or be disappointed that I'm not doing the level of gymnastics I was doing before. It'd have to be a new project. And I think that would be what would excite me. And since I retired, it was interesting. I had an experience when I was coaching where I decided to try the loop-in, and that I'd always had that in me. That was my biggest fear in gymnastics, was to do this skill on the high bar. It's where you let go of the bar, you do a straight shape over the bar. It's called a kachev. You do a full twist and you catch the bar. And it was like the skill I was the most scared of in gymnastics. And I wanted to approach that with like curiosity, like it was an experiment. And that came from me coaching. So I was coaching these young girls, and I noticed that the young girls, like, quite often were really scared of doing like a flick on the beam, going backwards, losing sight of the beam and doing a flick. And, you know, they're having like some little breakdowns and they were struggling. And I thought, what is that? And I was really interested about it. And, you know, the most famous example of this was probably at the Olympics in Tokyo, and Simone Biles getting lost in the air. You know, and people call it the twisting problem or the T virus or whatever it was. And this became like a big thing. It was, you know, all over the news, and she had to pull out of a competition. And it's really tough. Like, it's hard when you get something in your head and it's a mental block. It's really, really difficult. And that is one thing that I actually learned towards the end of my career, is that after a period of routines or competing, I would take 1 month off doing any twisting. I would do all of my basic skills without doing any twisting, because when you're doing gymnastics, man, you're throwing so much information at your head. It's when you're fatigued and you're tired, that's when you get these problems. So I would go back to the drawing board and just do 1 month of like basic dismounts, somersaults off a high bar without twisting, somersaults on floor, like just straight fronts or flicks and straight backs backwards, no twisting for like a month. And that really helped with that. And these girls were having the same thing, a little mental block, you know. And it normally happens when they're tired, they're fatigued, and they maybe like scare themselves, get injured or hurt themselves, and it becomes really difficult to go for it again. And I thought, okay, what's going on here? And I kind of figured out that a lot of the time there's too much thinking space in your head. You know, rather than the girls thinking about, right, to do this skill correctly, I need to do X, Y, and Z. They were thinking about what's going to happen if it goes wrong. What if I hurt myself? What if I fall off the beam? I was like, right, guys, when you do a flick, what's a step-by-step process that you think about? What do you need to do a good flick? And I'd ask them, and they'd say, well, I need to push, or I need to block with my hands, or I need to watch my hands. And I go, okay, well, like, let's do it in order. When you do a flick, what's the order of the things you need to do? And so I was trying to explain this to these girls, and I was like, I need to go and try this myself. I need to practice what I preach. And so I applied that to the Lukin. And I went onto the bar and I said, okay, what are the 5 steps I need to think about when I'm doing this skill? Because what would happen was I'd be doing a giant, getting ready to do it, and all I'd be thinking was, it's going to go wrong. I'm going to let go early. I'm going to twist early. I'm going to land on the bar. I'm going to hurt myself. Rather than thinking about the step-by-step process I needed to do it well. So I broke it down. I need to put my chest in. I need to push away. I need to kick up high. I need to put my head in, drive my heels, and then do the twist. And I'd say this, I'd visualize it in my head, I'd repeat it, I'd do it with a pad. And in the end, it worked. It was not perfect, but it was working. And it seemed to help these young girls with doing a flick on the beam as well. So for me, it'd have to be that experiment. It'd be like, I'm going to try it myself, that curiosity. That's what would excite me about making a comeback, I think. And then so after I, went and watched the thing on Netflix, The McGregor Forever, and I sat up all night thinking about how would I make a comeback, like how would I do that? I think it was really important that I went to the gym and tried to do some gymnastics. So last Friday, I went to the gym, I took my handguards. I've literally not put a pair of handguards on for like 8 months. I went in, I did a bit of conditioning. I wanted to climb the rope. I've not climbed the rope for ages. And literally it's the first time I've had a bit of an itch or a buzz to do a bit of gymnastics. So I climbed the rope, came back down. I felt all right. And I was like, right, I'm going to have a go on the high bar. I had to borrow some tape off someone, put a bit of tape on. My hands were okay. I swung around the bar. But you know what? The day after I went, yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to do that to myself. And actually, I'm just not inspired and motivated anymore by that. I've done that. I achieved that. And actually, I'm more excited and more interested in the next adventure. I'm enjoying going to the gym. It's new, it's fresh, it's something different. I'm loving football. I've got plans to try and play 11-a-side football next year and play a full season. That excites me more. But yeah, if I was going to make a comeback, that's probably how I would do it. And ultimately, all I'm going to do is, try to learn from all of the mistakes I made in my career and put it right. But it would have to be for fun. And the only way I would probably do it is if there was a really rich bloke watching or woman that decided we're going to give you 50 grand. Because the reality is I would probably have to work, I would have to still try and do the podcast. I'd still do my coaching at David Lloyd. I'd still have to go into schools. And the idea of that, it's just so much work, man. It's so hard. Physically, it's massively demanding. I would come back from training and be absolutely exhausted all of the time. And for me to take on that commitment, yeah, I think I would be, I'd have to be paid a lot of money to do it. But yeah, it was, like I said, I really do believe that every athlete that retires, they dream about that. They think about it. It's because it was such an amazing buzz in your career. It's really hard in real life afterwards once you've retired to find that. I've found that tough. There's nothing quite like doing a routine in the gym or catching a new release and catch or winning a competition and getting that buzz and that feedback, that adrenaline coursing through your veins. I never get that anymore. I never get that feeling like I'm going into battle. Those emotions that are flying through you, it's really hard to find that in everyday life. And I think that's why athletes struggle so much. And I think that's why so many athletes, try to make a comeback. But yeah, for me, that's long gone. That journey's finished now. I'm on to the next chapter. But it's been really cool to think about how would I do it? What would I do differently? Hopefully you've enjoyed that. And I hope that, if you still are training and you are towards the end of your career and you've got maybe one more competition to do or you've got one more goal, maybe you'll find some value in this episode and it will help you think about it. And if you're not, if you're a young athlete, maybe in years to come, you'll be able to go back and listen to this and it might help you, when you get towards the end of your career, think about, right, how would I approach that slightly differently from the way I did it when I was younger. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this episode and it's been a cool little project to think about over the last week. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for listening and I will see you in the next episode.